considerable physical hardships of his autumn years, Hokusai never lost the youth.
I didn't want to make Hollywood projects. I'm not into Hollywood style. I respect them, but it's not my thing. I'm independent in mind and action. And pretty much all the work you see here, by the way, is all done by me on my own, except where they're obvious commercial projects, in which case I had a team and a studio around me. But for example, this, I'm going to show you now, I developed a project. There's you may have heard of him or you may not, but there's an iconic British illustrator from the turn of the 20th century called William Heath Robinson, and I totally loved his work. He wrote a story called The Adventures of Uncle Lubin. You're looking at it here, and it's a visual storybook for kids, and it's still in publication today. It's amazing. It's very simple but so charming. And I thought, I want to make a film of that. I want to make a movie about Heath Robinson and Uncle Lubin. And this image here was the very first promotional image I ever did on Photoshop. Photoshop just came out, and I was able to, now it's ridiculous what technology does. But in those days, it was a miracle to be able to put a photograph and a piece of artwork together. And I did this on the very first version of Photoshop. So in that sense, it's a historical document. This was a trailer I combined with a very famous independent live action producer, Simon Channing Williams, and we made this trailer to try and promote the film.
At the age of 24, I was last beginning to earn my living. It was at this time that I became conscious of being haunted by a strange little genius. Where he came from, I cannot tell. All I can say is that he was quite irresistible, and in due time came to be known as Uncle Lubin, whose life and adventures I wrote and illustrated.
Anyone of film buffs among you may recognize that was a young David Thewlis volunteering his time. We didn't pay him. He chose to do this. That was filmed in a house in London, and it was in the summer, and the temperature inside that room was over 100 degrees. And I'm sure you're all used to hot weather, but in London, we're not used to 100 degrees for filming, and trying to keep him from sweating. And the whole thing was a nightmare, but I loved it at the same time. But David Thewlis has since gone on to do many things, but he was Professor Lupin in Harry Potter movies. So there's a weird sound connection there. We tried to get the pilot film. We tried to get funding. We got a lot of interest. And then very, very sadly and tragically, the producer, Simon Channing Williams, died suddenly, and the whole thing just went away. It was his charisma. He was the producer of all Mike Leigh films. If anyone knows about Mike Leigh, the independent live action director, amazing filmmaker, Simon Channing Williams was his producer. So his loss was a big loss to the project, to the world of film, and to this project in particular. I started teaching at a couple of colleges, and this was kind of early 2000, about 2001, something like that. And I suddenly got this horrible dread and a feeling and gut feeling that Disney was going to go away. The Disney studio was going to go away. And they were still, making their films. I don't think they were making very good films at that time, but they were still making films. But I had this dread, and it turns out that's exactly what happened. But when I had the fit, I thought, I've got to make a film. And I had a number of students, and the hardest thing for any student, as you know, guys, is you can graduate with honors and you can do amazing work, but unless you've got industry experience, it's very hard to get into the industry. And the question is, how do you get experience? So my solution, in a small way, was, why don't we make a film? And so basically what I did is, during the summer break, I'd already started making the film. This is called Endangered Species, about the rise, the fall, and the hope for rise again of traditional 2D animation. And I thought, why don't we just make a production during the summer break? And so that's what I did. I had students auditioning, applying for a position in the film, auditioning. I assigned them a role in the film, and we ran it like a production studio. So this was the film I made, which is really a history of animation. But I couldn't use copyright material to show the animation from various films. So what I did, I recreated them with my Arnie character. You'll see Arnie appears everywhere, and Arnie stood in for the animated actors from all the clips of film. So these were some of the scenes that were in it.
It began over 40 million drawings ago. It was a time when a unique creature lived and flourished. Animaticus Drososaurus. The Animaticus was to profoundly influence and dominate its world for almost an entire century, although ultimately the Animaticus was destined to become yet another of nature's endangered species. The death of the herd's great leader meant that the Animaticus would now face a cold, bleak winter, alone and unprotected.
See, the whole thing was done like a David Attenborough documentary, wildlife documentary. And I actually did try to get him to do the voice for it. But he's still alive and still thriving now in his 90s. But at the time, he was pretty old too. And he said he just had too much other work, he couldn't do it. But he wished me luck with the film because he loved the idea and everything. So I got an actor to kind of, not to impersonate him, but to be in that area of feel that David Attenborough adds to a film. Okay, so then I was basically, my whole career in the States for 20 odd years has been teaching at various levels as the dean of a college and various different levels, and through my own 2D academy. But the word got around that I was also desperate to make films. So the Seattle International Film Festival, SIFF, were running a film competition for filmmakers, not animators, filmmakers in live action, called the Fly Film Challenge. And they wanted a generic title sequence to go ahead of what they did, they commissioned 4 different up-and-coming live-action directors, gave them a location, gave them a theme, and gave them a very small budget and said, go and make a film and we'll screen it on a special evening at the SIFF Festival. And that's what they did with 4 filmmakers. And they wanted a generic opening sequence at the beginning of each sequence. And that's what I did. So that was basically that. Off the back of, while I was still teaching and still trying to get students in industry experience, I was approached by the Tacoma Museum of Glass, very famous. This Pacific Northwest area is very famous. Dale Chihuly is the worldwide star of glassmaking, and he's from here, the Pilchuck School here. And the Museum of Glass celebrate all their work. And they said they wanted to make they called me and said, we want to make a film on the history of glass and glassmaking. Okay, and we just want to have fun, and maybe your students can do it. So again, I think I had like $5,000 to make it. And basically me and my students did it. I'm not going to show it because of time, but these were the 2 main characters I created for the script, Ash and Bernie, because it was all about fire, and they're called fire gods. The film's called Fire Gods, and it was, glass is made by high levels of heat and fire. So I thought Ash and Bernie were perfect narrators for the film. Mostly I've been teaching, as I say, at high level and low level class sizes. And of course, COVID changed everything and moved us all online. I was already online to a big degree before COVID, but I've kind of remained so ever since, because at my age, I don't want to travel everywhere in rush hour and everything. So, I find I'm more successful online with students than I was in the classroom. It's really weird. You wouldn't think so. And I was very against online at one stage because I thought you cannot teach this online. But I did form my own 2D academy. I don't have the animation, but I actually animated this logo. We take a small number of class students, mainly high school students, although I'm beginning to attract adult students as well. For instance, established illustrators who want to make their work move, so they'll take my courses. And I had one student working in a major Hollywood place studio and they work in a special effects area and they want to learn movement and animation, so they join my class. But mainly it's high school students preparing to go to college. So I like to give them a good grounding in animation through. And there's my partner, Jeff Zhu. We got together to form the 2D Academy in Bellevue, Washington State. And this is my teaching desk, or was when we were in the classroom at his school. He had a small private school and he invested in us doing animation within that school. It wasn't an animation school. And at the time, I'm always looking for ways of A, me animating, and B, trying to get a film finished, and if possible, C, have students get experience on my project. So I was approached by an old friend in England who had written a book on the legendary football player, Sir Stanley Matthews, the late Sir Stanley Matthews, long late. And he wrote this wonderful book called Spirit of the Game. And he said, I think this would make a great animated film. And so I read the script and I thought, yeah, he's right. So what I did was I worked on a trailer. Again, my life's full of making trailers to try and get funding for projects. And I worked on this trailer for Spirit of the Game. And essentially, we did a whole sequence. I'm not showing the whole thing, but the notion is there's a young, very talented soccer player in the darkened, poor areas of the Midlands of England. And he's so promising, but he's being distracted by gangs and drugs and crime, petty crime, and all kinds of bad distractions. And he's going off the tracks, but he's an amazing talent, one of the greatest talents possible. And the ghost of it's a Wonderful Life kind of story. The ghost of Sir Stanley Matthews comes back and teaches him the right way to live life, the right way to play the game, to play the spirit of the game, and transforms his life. And he ends up in the USA becoming a megastar and winning the World Soccer Club Championship for an American MLS team. Anyway, from that, while I was doing that, it was the 100th centenary of the birth of Sir Stanley Matthews. And although he wasn't alive, he'd been long passed away, we thought it'd be great to take some of the material from the trailer and make a tribute film to him, which we just put out on the internet. And this was it. All right, so Arnie, as I say, has always been with me. He's in my books, he's in my films, he's in my classroom and everything. And in my imagination, he's in my life and looking over my shoulder and playing tricks on me. I'm not crazy. I don't really think that's happening. But in my imagination, as an animator, I think all those things are very possible. So Arnie can also be a spokesman. So you saw a little clip of this earlier, but this is from a trailer I made, because my one burning, I tried all these film projects and I haven't shown you half of all the trailers I've made to get film projects. I've never been able to get anything, especially here. I came here as the country that makes animated films, and shortly after, as I said in that video, it all closed down. It all closed down overnight when Disney shut down their 2D animation studio. I had investors lined up. It was amazing. I had investors lined up for my projects. We were looking at premises for studios. We're doing that. Disney closed the studio. They all went away and they've never come back. And this country really doesn't make, it ships out work for the TV series and things like that, but it doesn't make 2D, and it's not a career path in 2D animation. It's not a production path for any studios or anything here. So it's been a nightmare. but nevertheless, I kept making trailers and everything. But I thought, if I can't get fictional projects made, perhaps because my British Academy Award came from a documentary approach to animation, perhaps I can do an animated memoir film.
I'm living under a cloud. Can't put the weight I'm bearing down. The bell has rung, but I can't stop the fight. Don't let me get too far from the light. I'm always caught off guard. Life is good and then it's hard, and you can bet I'll be saying I'm alright. Don't let me get too far from the light. If it has to be that I must live in exile, banished to the shadows once in a while, I accept this as my plight. Don't let me get too far from the light. So I sing this song to you. There's nothing else for me to do. Oh, I have weathered many darker nights. Just don't let me get too far from the light. Don't let me get too far from the light. Don't let me. Don't let me.
Okay, so some of the artwork in the film, that sequence of the tiger was me recreating nightmares I used to have as a kid. You know, I said I had a terrible childhood. It was a psychologically terrible, it was health-wise, it was terrible. And one of my recurring dreams, nightmares, was a tiger leaping out of the wardrobe in my bedroom and landing on my chest and coming down to eat me. And I'd wake up screaming. And this would happen for a period of years, trust me. And it was a terrible thing. So I thought the best way of exercising things like that is to bring them to life. And so this is the color model for that. When I was at art school in East Ham, I told you about the East End of London, my teacher was the great Ralph Steadman, who the famous Gonzo artist and other political cartoonist artist and everything. And if anyone knows of him, the model we had that Ralph used to bring in for life drawing was Quentin Crisp, who was very famous. John Hurt played his life story. He could hold chairs over his head without moving, without shaking for 20 minutes. Nobody I know could do that, but he could do it. It was amazing. So this was an amazing experience. But Ralph Steadman was famous. The look of horror on the scream on my face here is because we'd sit down and do our pretty life drawing pictures, and then Ralph would come down with his big black beauty pencil and just obliterate it and rip it apart and show us where we're getting it all wrong. And in the end, we'd never see our drawing again, but we'd see his, what I call barbed wire all over it, But he was absolutely right. He taught us. It was cruel love. And he was one of the most amazing. I actually ended up animating a commercial with him years later, but he was one of my amazing teachers at the time. But as always, the project's looking for a producer, and I've never found one yet. But I live in hope. I live in hope. If not, I'll find another way of doing it, as I'll explain in a minute. I went through the whole COVID lockdown working on my book, this book, Animation Masterclasses from Pencils to Pixels. It was like my 50 years in the industry, plus 50 years, everything and teaching put into one book. And one of the big projects that I've always wanted to make in my life was a project called Marder and the Magic Tree. Over the years, this distilled into a big story. It's a mystical hero's journey. So I tried to get the screenplay funded, tried to get the movie funded, never could. So I decided more recently to start turning it into a graphic novel. So these are some of the images of the story. What I did was I started working on the graphic novel, and there's him entering the tree. That's the cover. But I also made this trailer of my graphic novel so far. All right. And I thought I'd share that with you now. I used the trailer to try and get support on Patreon. It worked a little bit, but not enough to really make it significant. And dare I say, I'm against AI in the sense that while it steals from artists, I'm 100% opposed to it. But the potential of it, if it can be done ethically, would transform this film. I could create worlds, imaginary worlds that this main character, Marder, goes through using AI and AI-assisted concept art, if nothing else. In the meantime, because I'm obsessive and I'm a workaholic for animation, I decided to create a phone app, all right? And it's called Drawtastic. It has courses, items, interviews. There's going to be a historic part of it that shows old equipment and old techniques and things. Anything I can get that supports and carries 2D animation through to the new generations, the new technical world. I want to put it on that app. And I did just to get a little bit going, I set up an Indiegogo campaign. And this was the promotion that I'd always put on my social media to get funding, to get people to contribute to it. And we actually made our first target. It's not the ultimate target, but the app is like this. when you go, it's actually available right now. It's more or less a beta version of it, but there is a version of it available in the Apple Store and on Google Play. You can download it for free. And there are some, these are not all the courses that are on there. They're the courses that I want to put on there, and eventually I will when and as funding comes in. But the Indiegogo campaign has allowed me to get 4 courses prepared. This is the promotion I did for Indiegogo.
How would you like to find everything that you need to know about 2D animation at the press of a button on your tablet or phone? Tony White's new app, Drawtastic, supports and teaches the past, present, and future of all things animated. So please help Tony build his unique animation app by supporting our exciting crowdfunder, Drawtastic. Everything you could ever want to know about 2D animation at your fingertips.
And the one feature that's in the app, which is a free feature, is my Drawtastic. You have a wonderful festival. I've had the Drawtastic Festival for many years. It's online. We just put it out there and to encourage animated filmmakers to submit their films. Usually students are our major contributor, but professionals too, and different genres. It's not just 2D animation, although we love 2D animation most. It opens up to different categories. And basically, yeah, that's my crazy world. So I'm really opening it now for questions and answers. I'm sure you've got a million of them, but
So, Tony, thank you so much for that presentation. And your life and your volume of work is beyond astounding. It's awesome. It's something else. Starting from.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Pratik.
Yeah.
If only I could convince investors and distributors of that, it would be great.
I wanted to ask a question basis that itself, because on the day of the festival, on the first, one of the first talks is by one of India's powerhouse animators called Vaibhav Kumaresh, and he and his team at Vaibhav Studios have taken 16 years to create their feature-length film that they wanted to make, and it's an indie film, and he actually took that much time because again they were working between projects and advertising and making promos and content for television, and they've just finally released it for the film festival circuit literally last month after a 15-year long journey, right? And from that, it's so good to hear from you as well that you're working it on the indie circuit as well. And they also have had a really tough run because they're like, look, this whole distribution business is, I think that's what ends up happening is we are creatives, and when we're not the marketing guys, we're not the distribution guys, we're not the producers, and finding producers for animation in India is a task. It's something else.
In America too, trust me. The big irony of my life is I left in '98 because I couldn't get movies funded, despite everything I'd done there, the awards and everything. I couldn't get movies funded there for animation. They kind of looked down their noses at animation. But right now, there's a resurgence in Europe because of this thing called Cartoon Europe, or I think it's called Cartoon Movie, where after a couple of years after I left, all the different film institutes from every country in Europe realized that their own budgets were not enough to compete on the world stage in making movies and things like that. So some bright spark, I don't know who it was, said, why don't we all get together? Why don't we pool all our resources? And why don't we support an animation industry across Europe? And what we can do is and what they do is every year they have a big cartoon movie event in France, I think, where all the producers, all the investors, all the TV companies, all the agents, and the young emerging filmmakers who are selected, you've got to be selected for it, they all come together in one big building, and the young filmmaker goes on the stage in front of about 300 of these, movers and shakers in the European industry, and pitch their projects to them. And then they're allowed in another room they have a booth or something like that, where they go and sit in their booth and hope people come to them. And so much work is generated because of that. Yeah, the plan is to go back. I've exhausted my time in America, and it's just I've banged my head against the brick wall for far too long now. It's time to move on.
Crowdfunding, that's something that you've done for your app, and you've also done it for Bad Penguin, which was also a
Oh yeah,
Kickstarter.
I didn't show that because, as I say, I had to leave things out. But Bad Penguin, I don't get very good results from crowdfunding. I have to be honest. With Kickstarter, I've done 4 campaigns in the past. Only one has made it, and that was the Bad Penguin one, and only just made it, and it was a lot of hard work to get there. But yeah, I made a trailer for Bad Penguin. I made all these positive and inspirational film projects, aspirational film projects, all these, and I could never get funding. So a friend of mine from New York sent me a script, and I read it, Bad Penguin, and it was 180 degrees from where I'd been. It was like an adult movie. Now, it's not porn, it's nothing like that, but it's adult, it's adult storytelling. But it's surreal because it's about a crazy penguin in the real world who hates Christmas and tries to destroy it for everyone. It's a Christmas story, but the opposite of the usual Christmas story. And I thought, yeah, I'll take that on. And we put it on Kickstarter, and as I say, just scraped enough. But again, even going in that direction, I found it impossible to get support to make the film itself. And trust, you can see the quality of my work. The frustration I have is that the quality of work that I love to do, and I believe needs to be done to bring 2D animation really back into the picture, needs budgets. It needs a big budget, and it's very difficult to get anyone to support that. Really, really difficult.
You also have written about the fact that, obviously, and you presented as well that you were with Richard Williams and Ken Harris. You've also mentioned Art Babbitt as part of your as your mentors who was there and who taught you. How was the experience of, and I know it's very difficult to say it in like a couple of minutes, but how was the experience? How were they in real life? And working with them.
Just amazing people. It wasn't just them. I mean, Dick Williams would actually finance. And he was such a visionary. Unfortunately, he lacked in other areas, but he was such a visionary, and he wanted to bring. He said the British were the great storytellers and the great designers, and the great concept artists and everything, but they couldn't animate, and so he would, at his own cost, fly over all these greats, these old greats who were not working anymore, but he'd bring them over to teach us. And I was especially lucky with Ken Harris, who was the most charming of human beings. He was just wonderful, patient, good guy. Art Babbitt was slightly more opinionated, but totally giving. And he would work around the clock to help you. And all the other ones that came over, they were amazing as well. I met my other idol, Frank Thomas, one of the 9 Old Men, and he came in while I was on an off day at the Richard Williams studio, and I was working on Hokusai because I had nothing else to do, and Dick was okay with that. He allowed us to use the equipment to do whatever we wanted, except the rival work, of course. And one day, Frank Thomas came to the door and said, "Hokusai." He saw what I was working, and I said, and I looked round, and there was Frank Thomas standing behind me with Dick. And Frank Thomas said, "He's my favorite artist." And so we got chatting for quite a while on that. So they were all so giving. It was a different age. There was no attitude, no ego, no self-promotion. They were just there to help you. And they would give of their time freely. It was a wonderful time. And I really, really, what frustrates me with the modern world, and I'm not saying it just because I'm of that age now. I'm the age that they were when they used to come and teach. But I'm sad that studios don't reach out and say, "Hey, come and talk to." Now, I don't travel anymore. I don't like traveling. But I like reaching out like this and sharing things and doing things. And of course, I do my classes doing that as well. But it frustrates me because Dick was the only one who did all those things. And it took our studio from that level, which was already pretty high, to that level. And really, it could have been the new Disney studio, except it wasn't really a good businessman. That was the problem.
Okay, I have one last question,
Okay.
and that's for the Monty Python. I don't know if you must have seen them back in the day, Terry Gilliam and his style of.
Yeah, absolutely. I love them. Yeah.
So did you ever get a chance to interact with them during the course, or were they like a rival, setup that was running around at that time?
Uh, okay, here's another story. I leave out so many stories, but at one time we moved our studio, our lease ran out, and we moved our London studio to Camden Town, which is just north of London. And we leased our property within a complex that was owned by the Monty Python team. The whole team had their business management, their working studio, they had a music studio, they had editing studios, they had all kinds of things in one complex, and they had one space that was going free, and they were leasing it out, and we leased it. And so for 2 years, I was actually rubbing shoulders with them all the time. I met all of them on first name terms, and except John Cleese, he was kind of remote, but all the others were there. And Terry Gilliam, just another added thing, Terry Gilliam was actually editing the Fisher King movie he made in the next part of the complex building. And he would come in and say, "Hey, Tony, come and see this edit." And he would, "What do you think?" And I'd go in and, he didn't do it all the time, but just occasionally he'd want an opinion. So he'd take us in. And they had this wonderful cinema, IMAX cinema, and they would, in England, we never got Hollywood movies or American movies until about 6 or 8 weeks after they were released in the US. They would get advanced copies flown over, and they'd say, "Hey, come on, we're going to show a movie tonight. We're going to watch, whatever." And we'd go in their private cinema and watch the movies long before they ever touched the UK shores, And so yes, I knew them, went to their Christmas parties, and they were just, again, really nice people, just real human beings.
That's it. That's I think what you're saying also is that connection between humans, us,
Yeah.
even though it's happening across the planet right now, but just that connection is something which is diminishing a little bit because of the way technology is molding conversations these days. So,
Yeah.
but what we're learning, in like the
it will change. We'll grow up. We will grow up. We'll learn to use our toys in more responsible ways. But unfortunately, I think we're going to go through rough times to get there. But I think we're going to. I do have to believe we're going to emerge as a much more mature planet in the end of it. And I think we're going to see through all the fakery and the ego and everything.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tony. This was amazing, and we really hope to catch you again. Thank you.
All right. Love to do it. And congratulations with the festival. Thank you for asking me, and I hope it's a success.